Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, whatever your time zone. Welcome. This is Digital Transformation Talk, and I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. Today, we're here to talk about making or breaking your digital transformation efforts. And if you were with us back in February, you may remember when I explored some of the research findings from analyst firms like McKinsey, KPMG, and Bain, and others that all find that the failure rate for digital transformation initiatives falls somewhere between 70 and 95%. That shocked me, and I began to wonder why such a high failure rate. Researchers point to a number of reasons, the top one being a lack of alignment to business outcomes and strategy with digital transformation. It seems that often the measures for digital transformation success don't line up with the measures for organizational performance. Is that true in your organization? A lack of adoption of the technology and systems also stands out as another major roadblock to digital transformation success. And it makes sense. You can have the most advanced technology and systems in the world, but if people do not embrace them and use them, then you've missed the mark. The pervading lack of adoption points to other common factors that also inhibit successes as well: lack of training and a lack or loss of talent and key resources, for example. Now, regardless of the high potential failure rate, however, companies everywhere are making record-breaking investments into digital transformation. According to Ernst & Young, investments are up 65% from just a couple of years ago. Indeed, worldwide spending on digital transformation is estimated to reach $2.3 trillion this year in 2023. Companies and organizations everywhere are looking to adopt new technology-driven tools and new ways of working, new ways of managing employees, new ways of managing tech, and new ways of serving customers. Many are making big moves toward the cloud, e-commerce, digital supply chains, data analytics, and certainly artificial intelligence. But the thing is, after years of heavy digital investments, companies are now feeling the pressure to show real results. According to one study from McKinsey, just 22% of organizations report a quantified value from their digital transformation investments. So again, why the struggle to show value? One challenge is simply measuring digital returns in the first place. After all, how do you define digital transformation? How do you define your success? How do you even measure that? And then how well are those goals and measurements linked to the fundamental key performance indicators or measures of your business? Will you move the needle in terms of performance? Ultimately, how do you identify the elements that can either make or break your digital transformation plans? Well, that's what we'll be exploring today with a great panel of guests. But before I introduce our panel today, I do want to say that we want to hear from you too. We want to encourage everyone today to participate. So please feel free to talk and comment in the chat section. And if you have a question along the way for our guests, please enter them into the Q&A feature. That's where I'll be watching for questions, and I will attempt to get some of them into the flow of the show. And we'll have a few minutes at the end also for your questions. All right, let's bring up our panel of guests today, starting with Steve Ingram. Steve, are you with us? Steve is an expert in digital transformation technology and specialist in retail. Steve, are you with us, and where are you calling in from?
I'm with you. I'm from Yorkshire in England. Looking forward to the discussion.
Very good, Steve. Nice. Welcome aboard. It's great to have you. Joining us also is George Sims. George is a senior director of product management strategy at RealWare. George, where are you calling in from?
I'm also in England, but Staffordshire, so just a little bit south of Steve.
All right, very good. George, thank you so much for joining us today. And also Chris Winder, Director of Marketing for Developer Cloud and OEM for OpenText. Chris, where are you calling in from today?
I'm actually in Toronto today.
Nice. All right. Well, Steve, George, and Chris, welcome aboard. Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to draw our attention to a news article published by the Enterprisers Project back in April, titled Digital Transformation: How to Teach the Language of Change. And it talks about how successful digital transformation depends on the entire C-suite sharing a language that expresses vision, growth, and change. That language, according to authors, starts with a common vision for digital transformation that illustrates how things like customer experience, employee experience, and business operation will be enhanced and improved with the addition of technology, and then continues with a roadmap to the future that accounts for how the organization structures and roles and responsibilities must change, and the need to ensure that stakeholders across the entire organization can adopt these new structures and roles and responsibilities. So my question to the group today is, in your experience, is this type of visioning something that could overcome the gap between expectations and performance that I spoke of earlier? And if so, what should C-suite executives do to instill this kind of codified vision? So, Steve, I'd like to start with you, if I could. What is your feeling about the article, and is this type of visioning in the C-suite essential for us to really meet the goals for digital transformation?
Yeah, it's an interesting article. Is it necessary? Yes, it is necessary, but I think we've got to step back and try and work out how we actually create a digitally literate board. And I think the key is, how do we actually get people to realize that, whether we like it or not, every business is now a technology business, because technology is driving whatever we do. And so how do we educate from the CEO to the COO to the CFO to everybody in every area that technology is an enabler and therefore will drive all of these transformation programs in your area as we go through them? So I do think it's about getting a digitally literate board in the first place. And then secondly, is making sure that the initiatives are about improving business KPIs and improving the business, rather than talking of implementing a technology and actually trying to find a problem solution rather than the other way around.
Well, it seems to me that the key message in this is there's a great deal of background noise. Somebody could mute your. There we go. Thank you so much. Now, George, it seems to me that the key message in this article is the shared language part of it. I think that can be difficult when each organization can vision digital transformation somewhat differently, measure it perhaps somewhat differently. George, what is your advice for C-suite members looking to be literate and looking to build that shared language?
Obviously, education's a good starting point. Just there's a lot of resources out there that you can consume to self-educate these days. And then I think the other side of things isn't just the C-suite's understanding, but it's having good people underneath them in the business and understanding your own stakeholders' understanding. So I think there's a phrase to understand is to be understood. I think that's very pertinent here, because if the people that you're trying to communicate to don't understand what you're communicating, you instantly have a problem. So technical literacy isn't just from the top. And I agree with Steve, it's needs to be improved at the top. But if you look down through an entire company organization chain, I think technology competency needs to, be seriously uplifted. There's too many people that don't understand the capabilities of technology, therefore they can't really have a good impact on a project, for example. Steve also mentioned KPIs. I'm a big believer in OKRs, so objectives, key results. It's certainly something that I've always lived and died by. It's a bit of a product management thing, really, but I've done Prince2 practitioner courses and waterfall, agile, all different types of project methodology. And I strongly believe objectives and key results from the top, driven down cohesively, always work. I haven't seen it not work. So yeah, OKRs, massive part of digital transformation. That's my 10 pence for mine.
So true. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? So
exactly. Yeah.
Chris, now you work with developers. They're right in the middle of this. What is your take on this shared language between C-suite, everyone involved, and a clear roadmap? How does that play out in your world with developers?
Yeah, I think that's where it gets really interesting, because we have this, I sometimes cringe when I hear that we need to bring up the technical language of people because the majority of businesses, and the reason that developers nowadays are so important, is because nobody cares about the technology. So we need to acknowledge some of that if we're going to be OKR or KPI driven, which is a business measurement, then the reason we're doing something and the reason that we want people to understand why we're doing the transformation has to be a business reason. It can't be because we need a new OCR technology. And I think we sometimes forget that when we translate, why we want to buy technology X to why the C-suite should get on board and drive that change downward. I think sometimes we go too much with, I call it the popes and presidents problem, where we start too soon with introducing things to the C-level, where we don't have the ability to talk legitimately about the business change that needs to happen and why making change X of a technology and doing what looks like a swap out from a budget perspective needs to get done, right? So I think sometimes we go too fast to getting C-level stakeholders on board.
Interesting perspective. We care too much about the technology and we go too fast to the C-suite. That seems almost contra to what we would typically do.
But that's why we've had failure rates of 70 and 90%.
That's right. Okay. And the mismatch between the KPIs and our objectives. All right. Well, then that brings us, gentlemen, to our first discussion point today. I'd like to dig in because we'll find some value here in discussing the fundamentals. In other words, what makes for a successful digital transformation? Chris, you mentioned it's not just a swap of technology. It has to move the needle in terms of business performance. So I'd like to bring it up to the group to help us define what some of those fundamentals are. What are some of the buckets that we need to fill to really move the needle? So George, what is your take on these fundamentals? What makes for a successful digital transformation initiative to begin with?
I think Chris made a good point. It's about making sure you understand the business outcome first and foremost. If you understand the objective that you're trying to collectively get to and work as a team to get to that objective, you're going to have a much better chance of success. And from a RealWare perspective, which is where I work, we work a lot in industrial manufacturing, so we're often needing to consult frontline workers, right? If we can't understand what goes on the factory floor, and I use a reference point we have internally, which is concrete dwellers and carpet dwellers, and I think too often the carpet dwellers make the decision without consulting the concrete dwellers, and then the concrete dwellers absolutely know what needs to be done 99% of the time. It's whether that gets back up in the right fashion. And Chris, you made the point, sometimes it's shortcuts straight to the top and then a rash decisions made on transformation based on one opinion. I think understanding the problem is the number one reason why you'll be successful. If you understand the problem and what you're trying to solve and everybody's bought into what you're trying to fix or solve, you'll have a much better chance of success. And it isn't to do with the technology. It's usually to do with changing business processes or reorging or something else that actually defines the success of a project. And again, making sure the concrete dwellers feel understood, feel part of the project, you will have much better success outcomes. Of course, you won't get 100%, but you're going to get better than the 70% failure rate that this article addresses. So yeah, that would be my take on it.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, George, help me out here. When I think about, what makes for a successful digital transformation initiative, I'm thinking about the business. I'm thinking about revenue and market share. I'm thinking about customer experience. I'm thinking about employee experience, employee retention, savings, workforce issues, sustainability, governance, environmental. These are sort of the big buckets that I think about. Are these the proper buckets that we should be putting in to our strategy to build a roadmap for successful digital transformation?
Yeah, of course. But again, it all depends on, all those buckets are relevant, but only relevant to the outcome you're trying to achieve. So I think it's very important that, you look at, again, the problem you're trying to solve and why you're trying to solve it. All those different metrics can be calculated and are often measured in projects. I see a lot more down the sustainability route these days than probably 5 10 years ago. But yeah, there's always financial benefit. There's time. There's a lot around employee well-being and making sure your employees are happy these days. I'm seeing a lot of transformation in that area. But yeah, it's a difficult question to answer without having the specific project to talk around. I think there's a number of different outcomes, but normally time, money, employee well-being, and environment are the key buckets that I see time and time again.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very situational.
Steve, we have some comments.
Yeah, it's very situational as well, though, isn't it? Because it's that project, it's what relevant at the time to take that business to the next step. And after what we've had in the last couple of years with the pandemic, with the change, I mean, I work in retail, so we see seismic shifts of things that have happened. So it actually then changes the focus, and it changes what becomes the imperative at that point in time. And I like the carpet dwellers and the concrete dwellers. We talk about the people in the stores, much the same thing. We talk about things that would change and how does it impact the person in the store, not so much the person at the head office, because it's those people that face the public, face the customers every day.
All right, very good. Now we have a couple of comments coming in. A couple of people are mentioning Deming, which I think is great. Deming still consistently becomes a benchmark for all of us in the management of change and the management of quality. And many of these aspects really pay a lot to the Deming principles. But Tony comments here, a key aspect of a successful digital transformation is better understanding what digital transformation entails. It is not simply about the technology, but encompassing process and people too. An organization's products, solutions, and services can only be remolded without the other two elements. Chris, what is your take on that comment from Tony?
Yeah, I think that's pretty spot on. I think sometimes we get so caught up in the automation part that we forget that the process isn't going away. And we worry about one little part of the process where we know the technology can fix it. And then you add this new technology, but you don't fix the process. So I think that idea that we need to understand what the process is so that we can understand what the change that affects transformation rather than just turning it into digital replication. One of the things that I used to do when I was an on-site consultant with school boards and schools is they go, oh, just make it a PDF. Well, that's not transformative, right? That's just replicating a piece of paper in a digital scenario. So we replicated the part of the process that was making people go bald. And not that there's anything wrong with being bald, Kevin. I have the same problem. But
hey, watch
the
it,
idea,
mister.
the idea that we don't think about how does that fit with the process, this new thing that will give us a benefit, is kind of the issues, right? And that goes back to that concrete versus carpet. If we don't go back to them before we do the final implementation and say, would this make your life easier? We don't get that benefit because now they have bought in. Now the stakeholders believe that, oh, we're going to get a 20% benefit. And you lose that benefit by not bringing people into the process because there's always a part of the process that you don't see. I do this one diagram where it's this linear piece that's all the technology and it's that workflow diagram. But then usually when I do when you go on site with a customer, you go, okay, what's not on this diagram? And you'll get the squiggly lines everywhere, right? It's how does that something get done? Oh, Janice always drops that off. That's not technical. I can't fix that.
I think if you look at what the definition of transformation is, though, it's a dramatic change, isn't it? A significant change.
Yeah.
So therefore, that has to impact people and process.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it occurs to me that now would be a good time to move to our second discussion point today, because we're kind of hovering around this idea of understanding what the current process is before we go about monkeying with it and improving it. Another Deming principle: measure your as-is process, identify the gaps, and then apply techniques and strategies to address those gaps in performance. So it brings us to measuring the success of your integrations and their contribution to your digital transformation efforts, and which KPIs or measures really matter. So, Steve, I'll ask you, which KPI should I have and in my strategy when it comes to digital transformation, and how do I measure them and when?
It's interesting because the ultimate KPI or the ultimate OKR that we're looking for is a business improvement. And actually, the measurement of your transformation is, have you actually delivered that business improvement that you've set out to do? I always talk about what are we doing, why are we doing it, and then it becomes how we're going to do it, and then we measure against it that point in time. So, you can have as many lovely charts showing your progress against your plan. You could have it all that, but it really is all around that ultimate KPI or OKR or whatever we're doing, which is what is that business dial that we're trying to move. And it's only that will then get you the budget to do your next one next year. I think one of the key things is not to be over ambitious what you're trying to do, or at least at the end, make sure you've got regular delivery of regular success. Because if you're ultimately transforming to something significant, you're going to want to take people all the way along with you. And if your first part doesn't work, then there isn't going to be the second part. There isn't going to be the third part. Then what we get is increased scopes where people say, actually, I never get a second phase, so I'll ask for everything in phase one. And we all end up descoping it. And it becomes this whole self-fulfilling. So I think as much as KPI, my biggest KPI is regular success, is probably a good way of thinking about it.
That's interesting, Steve.
We are getting some. Go ahead, George. Yes.
Really is, maybe should this talk be called, digital improvement rather than digital transformation? Because I've never, my 20-year career, seen a big light bulb. Oh, everything's changed overnight. It's like transitioning to green energy. It's going to take 30 years. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's a slow, continuous improvement over time. And maybe the idea of digital transformation as a whole concept isn't, or maybe is flawed from its very outset. And we should talk more about digital improvement with a transformation strategy behind it. I think that's more akin to the reality.
Yeah. Super tough to measure some of this stuff, but I think if you come back to the process improvement, how does the process perform today? In what ways is it performing inadequately? And then how do we apply whatever that might be? It could be a people thing, it could be a technology thing, it could be any kind of improvement to that process. I mean, that's where I think you can really get into the guts and feathers of improvement. We are getting some questions coming in from our attendees today, and thank you for that. This one from Rebecca that is right on with what we're talking about. Rebecca asks, are there any specific metrics or KPIs that are often overlooked but are crucial in assessing the overall impact of digital transformation on a business? Chris, what would you say to Rebecca?
I think the one that's often overlooked is really around the people part. So the idea is that if we're making a transformation like George and Steve talked about, it's going to be big. So one of those KPIs is involvement of the people in the process. Are they using it? Are they regularly going around it, or are they on board? So a lot of when we've seen success, we're looking for one of two things when we're doing a transformation project. One, we're looking for the workarounds to go away. So if we know of the workarounds, they should be going away. So my example with Janice shouldn't be walking those documents over anymore. And the other part that we should be measuring is if it is a new system or something like that, it should be number of users trained. That seems like a silly KPI, but at the end of the day, if users are logging into the system and doing the work the way we anticipated, A, we get that little bit of change that makes something work. And B, we have something where we can go back to people and survey, did we do it right? Can we move this forward? What is the next thing that makes this better? So to me, those are the big ones.
I think those are spot on, Chris, because as I mentioned in the introduction, a lack of adoption and a lack of training are among the top 3 reasons for digital transformation failure. So it makes sense that those elements be taken into account to reliably measure your success and the transformation that is underway. George, what is your take on the elements that we should include you know, in what, as we mentioned, what KPIs really matter? What should be in my strategy as I move forward, and what should I measure?
I think the question was
Have we
about
missed anything?
which ones are overlooked, and I think Chris, you touched on it. But I think cultural, what cultural changes happen in a business with tech transformation or improvement. I think culture is a very, very hard thing to measure, and you could quantify it in a number of different ways. But overall, if transformation is successful, normally you'll see a cultural shift or a change. We sell, wearable computers that are on your head. There's a huge cultural piece to that around, do I feel stupid next to my co-workers? Do I feel comfortable using this new technology in front of my co-workers? So I think there's that measurement's often overlooked in a lot of programs that I've seen. Normally it's a clean, hard financial metric or a metric against carbon savings, but I think that's because the world's driven by dollars, right? It's driven by finance people primarily. Therefore, most measurements come back to a number that can be tracked on a spreadsheet, and I think that needs looking at as we move into the next phase of growth of the world. Really, I don't think everything should just be tracked on a number. There's more sensible measurements.
It's one program we did last year or so, and we actually spent a lot of time and we focused in on the key users, the key people that were going to be the users of the system, and we went around and created a chart or a slide or a little manual. What's in it for me in my role? And actually went around, but actually then put the negatives as well as the positives. Said, actually, you're going to do this. This might be slightly more long-winded, but the benefit to the whole is this. Or you're going to do this now, you're going to do that. And it actually, the adoption increased. It was it felt laborious at the time, but the actual increase in success we got from that was phenomenal. Because people started to go, that's why I'm doing it. That's what's in it for me.
It's that point about feeling understood. I think that's so important. If you feel like you are understood, you are more than willing to accept change.
Yeah.
And that's a great way of doing it, Steve. I'd love to see or hear more about that one.
Yeah. All right. We are here with Steve Ingram, George Sims, and Chris Winder. If you have a question for our panel today, please feel free to enter that into the Q&A feature. That is where I'm watching for questions. I do know that we have some discussion going on and some questions coming in, so thank you so much for that. And this one from William, talking a little bit more about the technology part of it. The technology is the facilitator of the solution. Success can be measured by increased throughput and accuracy against cost to achieve it. Tech solutions should always outperform the cost of capital to achieve the result. Now, folks, do you agree with that? And if so, how do we measure that?
Completely. The idea that technology is a facilitator, it delivers a capability and helps a capability in what somebody's trying to do. And it's not a solution looking for a problem. Like I keep saying, we don't deploy a technology, we give a capability. And completely agree with William's other point as well about tech solutions should always outperform the cost of capital to achieve it. Over a period of time, and picking up on that one, more and more are expecting return on investment within the 12 months or within the financial year of projects that are put in place now. Otherwise, you don't get the opportunity to ask for the budget for the next year.
So one good piece of advice is to always include something like a net present value or an internal rate of return, certainly ROI, in any of your proposals for technology.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, gentlemen, let's move to our third discussion point for today in the time that we have remaining, and that is identifying and overcoming the obstacles for your digital transformation efforts. First one that comes to mind is talent and resources. We hear over and over again that companies are struggling to find and keep the right kinds of talent, and it is affecting digital transformation success. So, Chris, what is your take on the talent and resources aspect of digital transformation and identifying and overcoming that obstacle?
I think it's often poo-pooed a little too much. I think one of the more red flag conversations I've had when I was a consultant is usually around the idea that, oh, we can hire somebody. Well, you can't always just hire somebody, because if we're really transforming something, we're taking our process and we're making it new. But that means that you have to understand the delta, right? You have to understand where you started from, which requires somebody who has internal knowledge and where you're going. And so sometimes we don't want to pay for training. We want to pay for someone. And we get into this weird scenario where we're consistently looking for we're looking for this unicorn who can fix it. So it'd be great if when we start these projects, we put the dollars in for the cost of training existing staff. We make that a value add. We make that part of their skill set. That's the way we can start to see transformation projects start to gain momentum. That small kind of first pebble problem that we end up having.
Definitely.
And George, what about the talent and resources aspect of digital transformation? What is your advice for organizations that may be struggling to find and retain the right kinds of talent?
That's a tough question. I mean, talent retention is a very, very difficult thing, all right? And again, it's hearts and minds, right? And I think most people stay in businesses if they feel understood, they feel like they've got purpose, they feel like they're rewarded sufficiently for the job they do. So obviously there's some common HR practices you can put into making sure people feel valued and feel like they are being remunerated correctly. But really making sure you identify the right people at the start of the project and make sure they're fully bought into what you're trying to achieve as you go through it. Chris made a very good point, and again, training, education are normally the ways to really ensure talent is retained within a business. So yeah, that would be my take on it. I'd also say, I think most digital transformations in terms of obstacles, if you start small and prove your point somewhere in isolation, proof of concept, pilot, trial, production, if you have a nice clear roadmap and a staged approach to doing it, again, the human beings involved in that understand where they are in that journey, and it's not overwhelming. So you're not asking this guy to suddenly come in and, transform 70,000 workers from, one system to another. They understand that they're going to do 2 people and get these 2 super users brought in, and then there's 5, and then there's 10. And if the people understand the journey that they're about to go on, they're far more likely to stay with the project. And you do need those key talent resources to stay with a project through its life cycle. Can be very difficult to replace. So,
and make it part of their job, right?
Correct. I think it's a step
not above their
So
job.
Steve, yes, if people need to be happy. We think about customer experience, but it would make sense to me that employee experience be one of our top measures. Steve, would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, yes, and I think, but I think there's a step back to what the guys has been saying as well. It's understanding what you actually want in your retained organization as well, and what skill sets you want to hold, and an appreciation that you're never going to have all the skills and you're never going to have it all. You're going to have to buy some external support in from places. You're going to have to realize that your organization is going to be made up of the people that you have and the people that can provide, for example, the technical expertise, because as things move on, you might want technical experts in those areas, but you don't want them on your retained staff necessarily. And so it's understand what you want to do as an organization. Do you want to do the think? Do you want to build? Do you want to run? Do you want to do all of it? And there's consequences to whatever you might decide as part of your strategy. And then your retention goes different ways. And how do you provide a career path for the people as they move through? How do you do all of that? It's but I think it's that point, which is the one that I have most interesting conversations about with people is, so what do you want your retained organization to be? And that starts people thinking about the future, and then stops them. And it's at times it prevents people going down a totally, well, I've got to go down this technology solution because they're the only people I have in my business, so I must use that. And actually there are options that could be better and more appropriate. So it's a slight diversion, Kevin, but
right. No. Well, all right. We have reached the question and answer period of our program today. So, folks, if you have a question for our panelists, now would be the time to enter them into the Q&A feature. I will attempt to get them here in the time that we have remaining. This one is a question, sort of comment from Hugh that I think is spot on. And Hugh says, we all know how the pandemic accelerated digital transformation across many industries. Would businesses continue to fast track their transformation initiatives over the coming years? Or do we need another pandemic to drive them to accelerate digital transformation? That's a good question, since some research is telling us that we perhaps have reached a plateau with digital transformation. But I think it's a good point. Do we need something like another pandemic to really spur the next wave of transformation? Steve, you're from the retail industry, or work heavily in the retail industry, which experienced a great deal of disruption over the pandemic. What's your take on this?
I think we're probably in a little bit of a pause for breath at the minute and a bit of a stability. While people are, there was a whole degree of urgency and transformation and necessity that happened during the pandemic. We're now seeing a little period where they are strategically aligning some of the foundations to support some of the urgent stuff that got done. No, I actually think, and I think this is great coming from a bloke with grey hair, but I think some of this is generational as well. And I think we've got some older heads, boards, CIOs, IT directors, whatever, that want to continue doing what they currently do, but maybe want it on faster, more shiny technology, or want to do this. I think we have a generation of younger, more ambitious people coming through that see the potential for what can be done and delivered through technology, and they will continue that continuous transformation or continuous innovation or digital improvement as George called it. But I think it will be that. I think we've set, it's aware now and it's out of the blocks, and I think the ones that are capable and the ones that have that ambition will be doing it and continuing it. I think it's others have to catch up.
George, do you believe that a new generation of younger professionals will be the next wave of digital transformation or digital improvement, as you put it?
Yeah, I think there's more of a mentality in younger people that I work with to fail fast. That's a thing I hear a lot, and it comes from software development mindset and digital marketing, growth hacking type of worlds. But yeah, this idea of try it small. If it fails, it doesn't matter. Try it again. I think the older business mind sometimes is more risk averse and would rather try and strategize a 5-year plan and implement it to exact, without being aware of the changing world around that project. So yeah, I think that's true. I also think there was an awful lot of tactical, reactionary based transformation through COVID that I think needs to be looked at retrospectively to see whether it actually is sensible moving forward as a continuous piece, or whether it should be, take that learning, go and put it into your disaster recovery or business continuity teams and bring it out when you need it again. Because some things I've seen implemented don't or haven't probably driven the best outcomes for maybe employee happiness and things like that, because they were reactionary. Everyone pulled together and did what they needed to do to get through the period. Is that sustainable? Probably not in a lot of cases. So I'd say I'm seeing a lot more strategic initiatives now, a lot longer sales cycles, a lot more discovery and thought into it again. But there's clearly an undercurrent of youth in the project mindset, and there is definitely more awareness of what's possible with technology as well. So something changed. I still don't think, I don't know whether it was for the good yet or not. And I'm seeing people slow down, as Steve said. Projects are definitely slowing down, but the scale of the project is longer and bigger. So we're probably going back more towards an older mindset than we had in COVID, which was more of the young, agile mindset of fail fast.
All right. Chris, we're getting a question that I'd like to direct to you. We're getting a question from Tony. And Tony says, speaking of sustainability, how can companies strike a balance between innovation and maintaining the sustainability of existing systems during the transformation process? Chris, do you have a response for Tony on that?
Yeah, it's both a great question and a really hard one, because when we start talking about sustainability and striking that balance, you're really talking about how do we keep the business afloat while we're transforming. And that's kind of the key there, right? What have we defined what systems are absolutely required? If they went away tomorrow, we couldn't function as a business. And I don't think we often do that before we start a transformation project. We say, well, these are the systems that we have contracts for the next 7 years. What do we do next? Which is the wrong mindset. So when we talk about that sustainability in that piece, we have to ground it back into the things that we talked about earlier, which is the process over technology. What's the process that needs to be better, and how fast does it need to be better? And so that's when we have to go into those technology conversations about dependencies and the other parts. And that's where we have to break projects up into the process and then the underlying technology. So you have to, it's that balance, but it has to be a conversation. It can't be just one KPI on this system is always the basis of this. It has to be around what's going to make this process better and what's going to make this process best for everybody long term.
All right, we have been speaking with Chris Winder, George Sims, and Steve Ingram. Gentlemen, we have reached the action item round of the event today. In the time that we have left, just very briefly, I'm hoping that each of you could provide us with one quick action item that our viewers can use to take advantage of the ideas and advice today. Steve, do you have an action item for us?
Yeah, I think from adoption purposes, think of the what's in it for me. But I think the other thing is on general transformation is if you can't explain the what and the why, there is no point in thinking about the how. There you go, succinct.
All right, very good. Very good. That's a good, yeah, I should write that down and put it on a sticky note here. George, 30 seconds, 60-second action item for us. What do you have for us today?
It might be even shorter. I'll go back to the point about the human beings in the project feeling understood. I think if the people involved in the project understand what's required of them and they understand the goal, then you will have far better outcomes to your project.
And finally, Chris, what is your action item for us today?
Understand the process before you define the transformation you're looking for.
All right, very good. That is Chris Winder, George Sims, Steve Ingram. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a great panel today. Your perspectives and advice were spot on. Thank you so much. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon. And to everyone joining us today, thank you too. And join us next time. We will be on summer break, but we will return September 12th at 1600 British time, when we will talk with another great panel of experts next time about healthcare driving digital transformation. That should be a great discussion. So stay tuned for that and join us then in September. Meanwhile, if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. You can check me out. I'm Kevin Crane, and you can check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But until then, that'll do it for this episode of Digital Transformation Talk. Until next time, I'm Kevin Crane. Thank you for watching.